guitars today, I'm going to do some work on a Hagstrom Viking. Sharp-eyed viewers are going to notice that this is not the Hagstrom Viking I worked on last year. This is a different one. This one actually looks more like the one Elvis used during the opening of his comeback special, in that it's red. Elvis's guitar had a black headstock. This is a matching red one. If you're memorizing things and taking notes, you may remember me saying that these were introduced in 1965. They were available through the 1970s. They're built in Sweden by a company that got its start producing accordions. They're pretty decent instruments. Not that common in North America compared to some other brands. The serial number system for Hagstrom is amongst the most impenetrable of any guitar company. There will be a model number code and a production run in there, but there's nothing directly related to the date. And sometimes the production runs continued over several years, so pinning them down can be tricky. However, in this case, the serial number is very definitely from 1967, which kind of maybe correlates with the family history associated with this guitar. Apparently it was owned by a jazz player who thought there was something wrong with the neck and returned it to the music store where he bought it, where it was then purchased as a Christmas gift in 1976. About 15 years ago, the owner took it to a music store in Toronto and was told the truss rod was unresponsive. That could maybe be a deal breaker, but from my cursory examination when it was brought in, the neck on this is reasonably straight, without a ridiculous amount of relief. It's actually very straight. There is some damage at the end of the neck, which coincides exactly with what we saw on the previous Viking. This one is not quite so bad, but it makes you wonder how exactly that happens. Maybe if it's dropped, the neck flexes forward and cracks it up, you know. There's no real connection between the top and the neck block in that little area there. And then there's something funny going on with the bridge. The pickup is aiming the wrong way, at least to satisfy most sensibilities. It seems like there's a bit of a dip going on here, maybe. On these old plywood hollow bodies, it's not unusual for weird warpage to occur. It happens less on true semi-hollow bodies where the top is supported all along by a block, a la the ES335 Gibson. But this one should have a block under the bridge. Maybe it's sinking or loose or something happened. At the very least, we'll be shaping that pickup surround to cant in the other direction. It's missing a pick guard because something happened. A little crunchy there. As luck would have it, the owner has a replacement. So we'll make it look real classy. I like this color scheme. The action is abysmal. It's basically unplayable. 11/64ths, 9.5/64ths. So it needs a shim. One would expect that it used to have a shim that is somehow not in there anymore. An explanation for that could be that the block seems to have split in a couple of places, and I believe it's been previously glued up with super glue or something. Not in the neatest way, but we'll see what we can do. Checking the neck relief, it seems very, very straight. Like there's basically no relief, which is surprising in a guitar of this vintage. This could be a good or bad thing, of course, because we don't really know what the neck is like when this thing has action that's reasonable. It could be unplayable. As of right now, of course, there are no buzzes, but you would not expect there to be buzzing on a guitar that's got 11/64ths action. So we're going to see what happens there. One wonders how they managed to get away with using this headstock shape, because it seems kind of familiar. We're missing the logo. There's one in the case. And we seem to be missing a bushing. Boo. Good to have a case of Band-Aids on hand because, ow! Missing binding on the treble side. In this case, it's a 3-screw attachment system. One of them is fancy. So there is something of a shim already in there. That's kind of surprising. And you can also see a split right down the center, which may have been wrought by the introduction of this strap button. Could have been a bit too forceful. The hole may have been a little bit too small. Yeah, this whole area is a little bit funny. Just like on that last Hagstrom. Okay. It doesn't appear to be very loose. And there seems to be some kind of goo down in there. Is it possible this is a factory shim? Maybe. Kind of suspect not, though. The non-functioning truss rod I was warned about. You can see there's this rather large I-beam type structure which is threaded, and there is a ridiculously small Allen screw type fastener in there. Let's turn it and see what happens, just for kicks. I want to assume our Swedish friends did this with a metric key, but I may be wrong. Yeah, there's a pretty spectacular back bow in this neck when there's no tension on it. And if this started off as a 3mm, it's now slightly too big for 1/8 of an inch, so it's grown slightly. And even with my gripper, yeah, I don't feel safe. I think I'll start off by replacing the length of missing neck binding here. Give that glue a chance to dry. There's a chunk here which I'm going to dispense with. More binding. You want to clean out the channel, get rid of any grunge which may have accumulated in there. I'm going to square up the ends as best I can. There's a bit of a divot here, so I'll go to the other side of that, where the binding is at full height, and try to make a sort of 90-degree cut. Squared up one end of the binding, and I'll try and clip this just a little bit over long so I can sneak up on a nice fit. I'll get rid of some extra height on the binding using an upside down plane. This is also how I trim my thumbnails.
Terrifying on a bunch of different levels.
And I'll go back and use some more of that 605 Pacer canopy glue, which worked so well on the Epiphone. I'll tape that down firmly in place and let it dry for a day. Up next we have a Martin 0015, which seems to have taken a pretty serious hit. That's the worst. This, I thought it was older than it is. I just looked up the serial number. This is apparently a 2019. It's got a little bit of mileage on it. Just looking at it, the action is a little higher than I expect to see on a Martin of that vintage. 7/64ths, 6/64ths. But of course, some of that may have to do with this yawn. The entire soundboard is pulling up in that direction. The neck relief on this guy is about 8 or 9 thousandths, which is a little more than the factory would have sent it out the door with. It's still okay. Look at the wonders within. I didn't promise miracles. I'm just going to see what I can do to get this in alignment and glued back together. Like, it's really kind of pushing in two directions at once here, so getting that alignment might prove a bit difficult. We'll see. I'm going with tight bond for this. I like it for side crack repairs because it's not as brittle as hide glue. In the event that this eventually takes another bump, it's probably less likely to fracture open. I'll use a bunch of spool clamps and some wrestling to try and keep the two halves aligned. I've also got a bunch of very powerful rare earth bar magnets to try and hold things flat. Yeah, there were two cracks here that have been previously glued up in such a way that I'm never going to get them apart again. It's not perfectly level, but it's functional. And this center seam, there seems to be some glue in it. I'm going to add a little bit more. I got to mix up some epoxy for another job I'm doing, so I'm just going to add some more into this crack here just to kind of keep things from ever shifting. But as far as the pocket goes, it's not too bad. Okay, this has been glued down previously. I think much in the same way as the other one. See, when these cracks happen on either side, the gut reaction is to glue this thing down in place. Now the reason those cracks happened was because this top section here was arched over top of the block there. It was never actually touching. So when you go and clamp it down, you've squashed some of the arch out of it, and you can see what's going on here. I don't mind this, actually. It's reasonably level. I think probably the best thing to do is just sort of fill these cracks, put a little color on it, and then call it a day, rather than trying to separate this, prop it all up, and reestablish the arch, because, to be honest, there's only about 1/4 of an inch exposed, and, you know, I think it's actually structurally sounder when it's glued down. I think it was kind of not a great idea to originally have this free-floating portion of the top there, because it seems like they always break. There's one corner that's a little bit loose and a little bit high. The edges of the lacquer are standing up a little bit, so I'm going to flatten them with some 600 grit paper. I'm going to come in with some cherry red. Try to tint the exposed areas. Could use some help with a slightly darker tone. This is a sort of raw sienna. Now I'll build up several coats of some Glue Boost fill and finish formula. While the finish fill cures, we'll have a look under the bridge pickup and see what's going on there. It's hard to say, but I think maybe this pickup ring might have been put on backwards. Let's see, on this side it's about 335 versus 365 on that side, so 30 thousandths difference, 0.7 millimeters or so. Enough that we want to reverse it. Actually, the wire is long enough to do that. Does that make a difference? I think it does. We'll start off with it that way and see what goes on. You can see there's a fairly large block here directly underneath the bridge supports, and that has remained glued to both the top and the back. It's in there solid and secure. You can see there is quite a disparity in height between the bridge area and the section in the middle here. How do we rectify that? It's not like we can really push up on this side. Separating the top might be possible from that block, but I don't like its chances given the age of the plywood and just the fact that it has been flat for so long. If I go and try to introduce an arch here, also means removing these things, re-drilling for the feet, and likewise pushing down in this area, like adding a second block and trying to clamp it flat. There is not enough give to do that. By the time I've made this area flat, we're going to have the same thing that happened over here. It's just going to crush and fracture and everything. So I think it's going to be the way it is. If I don't like the angle of that pickup, I can always change the pickup ring a little bit, introduce more angle in this direction to make it follow the string path. But, you know, there are some wonky things in these old guitars. There's a pretty big divot and an associated crack, which might have been the cause of the whole side-splitting adventure, which I think I should seal up with some thin super glue. And another little one here. And I'll put some more along the line of the crack in the finish. It's time to make up some interior support cleats. I'll bevel the edges with a couple of long sticks and then cut them into individual little blocks. Those will be glued in with magnets, and in the interim I'll level the super glue fills using a razor blade. I'll do a light scuff sanding of the surface with some Scotch-Brite pad. When that's cleaned up, it'll look reasonable. And a similar thing is going to happen on the Viking, on the super glue fills around the neck break. Time to scrape the binding flush on the Viking neck. It's slightly proud. I have to round it over and try to blend it in with the existing binding, which isn't all that easy because the original has sort of shrunk down below the outline of the neck proper. So there's a bit of a lip there. I'm going to make mine flush so it's really comfortable on the hand. And I don't think it'll look too out of place. But I do have to scrape it back carefully. And then scraped it flush with the top of the fingerboard. And this, of course, leaves little nubs on the end of the frets, which would appear proper on a Gibson. Not so in this case, so I've got to cut those back and do some more scraping and sanding around them. In terms of frets, the Hagstroms I've worked on, they're essentially fretless wonders. Very narrow, extremely low, in the range of, say, 25 thousandths at their highest, which means there's not a lot of material there to dress down if necessary. And in the case with a very straight neck, it gets to be a bit of an issue because if these were taller frets and we needed a bit more relief, I could always dress it into them. But in this case, there's no room for dressing. I will do my best to polish them, however, and polish and polish. Just going to age this new section of binding a little bit with some marker. Immediately wipe that off. Just take some of the newness out of it. Yeah, it looks okay. Okay, 0015 here gets a fresh set of strings. Action has come down slightly since the gaping hole is no longer there. Still a little higher than I would like. This is factory setup. On these guys, which happen to be the least expensive American-made Martins on the market these days, you know, there's usually some room to come down. And I think it's time. I'm going to take a little bit off the bottom of the saddle here. I lowered the action by a 64th of an inch, and boy, is it a fun thing to play. I like these guitars. Time to fabricate a shim for the neck pocket. I'll transfer the position of the holes to the shim so I can drill them. There's a name scratched into the finish under the neck plate there. It says Boyne GKW. Yeah, I think there's some fundamental problems with the geometry of this guitar. Frankly, as soon as I saw the non-functional truss rod, I should probably just go hands off and say, nah, forget it. But I think I can make it play in a very basic sense. The neck shim is almost extreme in terms of its height. And this bridge is going to be bottomed out no matter what, just the way things are here. So I'm going to take a little bit off the pickup ring. It's about 2.5 millimeters on that side and about 4.5 on that side. I'm going to drop this by about 2 millimeters, and that's going to correct the angle slightly. I'll scribe a line using my marking gauge along the front edge. This is very brittle plastic. It wants to chip more than shave. Oh, it's so nice when someone holds on to a little piece of hardware like this, because it's not what you would expect someone to use for this purpose, but having it makes things a whole lot easier. Just don't drop it on the floor. There's a replacement logo here, complete with integral pins. What are the chances they match up? Oh, good. Nice. So they fit, not particularly secure. I'm going to put a little glue in those holes. I could use super glue, but I think it's better to have some chance of pulling this out again if necessary. This kind of string retainer is really amongst the most obnoxious when it comes time to restring. They're okay if you've got locking tuners, but if you're going to be wrapping around a post, it's just an obstacle. Let's see if I got a bushing in the collection that'll do the trick. Too big. Well, that'd be really nice if it worked, but it's too big. Not so matchy, but also too big. There we go. It'll function. The strings are crowding the bass side. There's a bit too much space over here on the treble. This is that funky saddle arrangement that you can slip sideways and adjust both the space in between strings and where the entire thing lines up relative to the pole pieces on the pickup or the neck. These are the plastic shaft pots with this felt washer that goes in there, ostensibly to keep the motion quiet, but after a while it just ends up feeling gritty. Alright, this is as far as I'm going to take it. The action is half what it was, which is nice. It's about 5/64 on the bass side, 4 on the treble, but absolutely no adjustment left on the bridge. It's bottomed out, as far as it'll go. And that honkin' big shim in the neck pocket, tapering from over 1/16 of an inch on down. And those of you who make neck shims will recognize that that's a very big shim. I hate the frets. The neck is definitely too straight. Can't do anything about that because the truss rod is what it is. There is a touch of lisp to the sound in the 3rd, 4th, and 5th fret area, which is what happens if you don't have enough relief in the neck. And frets that I can't dress down, so I've got 10s on it currently, and I think I'm going to let it settle in and see what happens for the next little while. Maybe try some 11s on it as well to see if that'd be better. Pickups are a little unbalanced. They sound very much like the ones on the previous Hagstrom I worked on last year. It's got the harmony control layout with the volumes on the top and the tones on the bottom, which takes a second to get used to. And now, just to warn you, there will not be a video next week. I have to make this announcement. Sorry, guys. I got a couple of jobs I have to catch up on, which I can't film. Patreon people will likely get a short video of me stripping that Les Paul. The rest of you should just hold tight. And no, it's not necessary for you to contact me on other platforms asking why there is no video, because our parasocial relationship does not extend that far. Okay? So let's plug this thing in and hear how it sounds.